Mixing with Mike, plugin of the week comes from Heritage Audio. It's the SYMPH EQ. The SYMPH EQ is a hardware mastering grade EQ created by Heritage Audio. This is their emulation of that very same unit. In its essence, it is a Baxandall design. We have a high frequency and low frequency shelf. They call it asymptotic filter or asymptotic EQ. Essentially what that means is when you do a boost, 3 dB, 6 dB, whatever amount that you make it, that it stays steady at that level once it sort of hits that peak level. So I think more or less that's what it means. It's a way of describing the shape of the low shelf and high shelf. There's also a high pass and low pass filter. These are running at 12 dB per octave, although if you run the unit in mid-side mode, your high pass filter becomes an elliptical filter shape, which is running at 6 dB per octave. Now, in its essence, what we have, the high frequency, low frequency shelf. Now, when you load this up, you might want to check to make sure that everything is linked if you're doing it, operating it in left-right mode. There's a couple tricky things about it. When you switch it to MS, it'll automatically unlink the two sides, which makes sense. If you start off with an EQ linked and then switch to mid-side mode, it will maintain those settings. So that's a little bit helpful. But when you switch off, you have to turn this back on. So that's one thing. In here, we have the EQ on-off. You could bypass the left or right side. If it's in mid-side, it's a bypass mid, bypass side, all the basics there. Has all the normal stuff with presets, save, copy, paste, A/B settings, all of those sorts of things. The only other tricky part about it here, just quick to understand, is that what we have is a frequency selection here. So we have whatever is about 6 frequency selections here just on the high frequency shelf. Each one of these steps is 1 dB, and you can add a half dB to it by hitting the plus 0.5. So essentially what it's giving you is 0.5 dB steps all the way up to 10 dB, or 10.5 dB actually. If you hit the cut switch, then this becomes an attenuation. So there'll be 2 dB of attenuation. If you hit this in, it becomes 2.5 dB of attenuation. So that's the basic formula here. The identical setup exists here on the low frequency shelving. Now, when you actually operate this, if you boost here, say at like 20 hertz, it actually goes up pretty far in the spectrum. In other words, it's a pretty soft, broad cue, which is kind of part of the smoothness of it. So if you see me doing settings that seem to be here in the subs, it actually makes a lot of sense, and you always obviously have to use your ears, because if you kind of get caught up in the numbers, you might think, oh yeah, I kind of want a little more warmth, go 220, and that may by the time you get to the end of that shelving EQ, it's already up around 12K. So it covers a pretty broad spectrum of frequencies, and obviously you can use that to your advantage. So let's start with the basics. I'm going to leave it EQ on, but no EQ settings here. So let me make sure that everything is zeroed out here. No high pass, low pass. So let's just hear what it does just on its own. I'll start with it off and then put it on. So you get a little bit of something. You're still getting the transformers at input and output stages, so it's giving you a little bit of something just on that end. Nothing like too major, overbearing, but, pretty cool. The only other thing that I forgot to mention is there's a makeup gain at the output stage right here, down at the bottom. So that'll make up for whatever you do. Let's start with a simple high pass, low pass. So this might be something you got on the low pass here, 30K or 22K, and on the low end, going up from 15, 22, 47. Probably not going to go up much farther than that for this mix, but let's have a listen. Okay, so that's just like a nice way of kind of, kind of what I would call sort of framing the top and the bottom end. Sometimes that can help actually to make the frequencies that you do hear come kind of a bit more clearly through. That's the sort of advantage of that. Let's leave that for a second. May adjust it, but we'll start with that as a basic. Let's also start here by now maybe kind of working towards the top end and the bottom end and see if we can kind of stretch the size of this out a little bit now that we've capped the end. So maybe we can kind of ripple that up on the low end and high frequency end of the spectrum here. Let's see. Okay, so what you're doing there is just sort of, this would be like a good like mastering kind of thing to do this, just to sort of lift the top and the bottom a bit. I could also kind of do the opposite here, where I switch that into a cut configuration and then make up the gain here a little bit. And this would make it bring out a bit more of the mid-range. So with the basics there, we just kind of, in other words, what I'm trying to show you here is that it's easy to kind of take this shape a little bit and kind of either, in a very broad way, sort of pull out more mids if that's a bit lacking, or to kind of go the opposite direction if the mids are a bit aggressive, to sort of very softly kind of move some of that energy higher and lower in the frequency spectrum. And as I said, the reason why I'm going down to these lower numbers here or higher numbers here is just the way that the shelving EQ, that broad Q that really extends much lower and higher into the frequency spectrum, just the number of frequencies that it's affecting, more or less. There's also a great way to use this as a mid-side EQ, right? So let me kind of zero this out here for a second. So when we switch to mid-side, it unlinks it. So the two sides are no longer linked together. It turns, as I said, the high-pass filter into an elliptical 6 dB per octave filter. And what this allows us to do now is to separate things. So maybe I want the air frequencies to sort of be open on the sides just to kind of lift that out a little bit more. Maybe I want to be, let's say, more aggressive on the low end. Put that back to a boost there in the middle. But tend to maybe cut away a little bit of it on the sides or something. So I kind of, get that low frequency energy to sort of drop down a little bit in the center and, make it a bit more focused in that area, primarily because you got the kick and the bass there and the guitars on the side are probably not eating up as much energy there. And, all right, let's just start with that, do a little bit of a boost on the top end over here on the side. Let's just leave, for the time being, the mid channel alone. Or let's check this out. right. So I like that. And one of the things I'm going to do here is I'm just going to pull this down a little bit and maybe kind of go somewhere in between just to kind of bring out a little bit more of the edge from the guitars that are out on the sides. Okay, so yeah, so I think that that helps a bit. And if you get the basic idea of it, it's a lot more flexible once you kind of start digging into it than what it might look like on the surface. If you think like of a mastering EQ, you might just think, oh yeah, I kind of want to have like sharper filters. I want to be able to notch out resonances. And obviously there are other tools that will do that a bit more effectively, probably more likely in the digital realm than in the analog realm. But just in terms of a way of kind of shaping the tone and the overall character of a mix or a master, just especially with the MS control, that really gives you a lot of ability to kind of shape that in a really cool way. And I think they did a really amazing job with the emulation here. It sounds great. I actually they used it on this mix. I called it up and started playing around with it and ended up wanting to keep it on the mix. That's not what these particular settings are, but I really liked it enough to kind of keep it on the mix. And so it's definitely worth checking out if it's not something, if you haven't already. This is their second plugin release that works in multi-format. They do have other plugins that kind of work with their hardware, Heritage Audio hardware interfaces, and hopefully they'll start to release some of those other ones soon. But this is a really cool one, definitely worth checking out. And that's why we have it as plugin of the week. Heritage Audio, SYMPH EQ.